All right, so good morning, everyone. If you're here, could you please turn on your cameras? So I see Josie, and all right, so good morning, everyone. Good. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's a good number we have. And so let me share my screen. Here. All right, cool. Okay, first question, like, well, how are you all? Secondly, so have you all saw the group enrollment thing on Blackboard? Are you having a problem with that, anyone? Okay. So yeah, so if you haven't enrolled yourself in a group yet, please do, like this Friday or during the weekend. And so by Monday, like before class, like you should be able to see all the groups on Blackboard with your names and everything. And then you can start working. So I'm already recording. I already recorded a video actually about the group assignment, which will be posted later. That's why we're going to cut the lecture short this time. There's also another video that I made about reliability and validity with an exercise that you have to complete. But today, finally, we will get to talk about survey design. We were talking about quantitative research before, but now we're going to, I want to shift a little bit to talk about the technicality of how you run a survey. And then we're going to go back and look at the standards for good or like good quality quantitative research, right? So just going to explain what survey research is, how you structure a survey, and yeah, and all those things. And yes, yeah, Ray, I saw your message, so I'll fix that. Don't worry about it. Okay. Okay. So, oops. Let's see. Okay. So, what is survey research? So survey research, to put simply, it's just a way to say, like, you're asking people a question and you measure the responses to those questions. That's what survey research is. It involved, as we said before, you're developing a questionnaire, which is a structured list of questions with quantifiable items or quantified items. If you watched the last lecture, you would understand that. And it works that, so you develop a questionnaire, you do, like, you pre-test it to see if everything is structured correctly, grammar-wise, writing-wise, and order-wise. And you select a sample of participant. And if you recall, we did a whole course on random versus non-random sampling, probability sampling, and which type of sampling would give you something more representative of the population. And then you administer the survey, i.e. run it, so either online, and which is the most common form nowadays, or back in the day, you would get a survey in the mail and fill it with paper, like it's paper and pencil, or like there are telephone polls, which are not as popular as they used to be back in the day when landlines were the main methods of communication. Telephone surveys were the most common, but it's really they are not used that much if you are trying to reach uh, like an actual representative sample, right? Because most people don't have landlines nowadays. And so what do we measure by a survey? So there are multiple things. So I could run a survey, for instance, like, do you know where you're getting your vaccine? Do you know where can you get your vaccine? Actually,
Are you just asking about like what locations in general?
yeah, what locations?
I mean, like there's various, like you can get at CVS, Rite Aid, your hospital. It just depends.
Right. So yeah. So I couldn't actually, if I'm worried about if the residents of the city or the country or the students of the university are knowledgeable about the resources that are given to them regarding health, financial assessment, school policy, blah blah blah. This is I can run a survey on just the knowledge, right? I can run yeah, I can run a survey about, with that survey, I can also look for demographic information. So we mentioned before, like getting age, gender, ethnicity, like income, those type of things. I can run a survey about, I can ask questions about cognitive beliefs and or perceptions. So it's beliefs with the like plural. So it could be like, how do you feel about coming back to school next fall, right? Or how do you feel about your job opportunities if you graduate post the COVID pandemic situation? Or like, how do you feel about a specific brand, a specific political candidate, a specific policy that state is using? How do you feel about what do you believe about a specific celebrity? I do a lot of research on that, right? Like, how do celebrities being perceived, right? Like, what type of emotions they evoke. So effective feelings and emotional responses. So we do that a lot in communication research. So like, if you watch a movie and then, okay, how is that, how does that movie or that short clip make you feel, right? Um, Grant, may I ask you a question? Can you tell me what's the last movie, show, TV series that you've watched?
Uh, Last TV series I watched was WandaVision.
Okay, and what do you think about it?
I thought it was a pretty good show. It was entertaining.
Was entertaining. What was entertaining about it?
Just the unraveling of how Wanda basically created her own reality away from actual reality, and then coming out of that and the effects that it had on everybody else.
So, as a matter of fact, there are scales or established measurements for enjoyment. Okay, and one of the things, so we want to measure how do people enjoy the show. So we have standardized scales, and one of the things, as a matter of fact, speaking of WandaVision, is what they call narrative transportation, which is to say how effective a show, a novel, a film was like in transporting people from the real world to that imagined or like portrayed universe. Like, sounds familiar, right? So if a show is really engaging, you feel like you're living and breathing with those characters. That's actually one measurement. So there are scales that are meant to try to capture that numerically or quantifiably. So that was a good example actually that fits what I wanted to say. Emotional cognitive states, which so an emotional state. So and this is used in PSA research. So they make you to watch an let's say a PSA or a commercial about autism or some type of disability, and I ask you how did that make you feel, like sad, sympathetic, angry, happy, etc., etc. So those things do exist, right? Like it could be a state or it could be a trait. Do you know the difference between a state and a trait? Any guesses?
Is like a state a something that could change, and then a trait is something permanent, like generally permanent, like your hair color?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's a state is yeah, like a current state that you're in, whereas a trait something in your personality. So personality trait like I am I'm outgoing, or like I am fearful, not fearful, but I am actually fearful is a very interesting part because you could be afraid like as a state, and you have fearful personalities, people who are not brave, right? You could be an extrovert or an introvert. You could be a narcissist, a little bit of narcissist, or like a big narcissist. So yeah, like personality traits, as we say. So those things and behavior as well. So what do you do? Like how many times a week you go to the gym? That's a behavior. Do you purchase, for example, organic or conventional vegetables? Like how much you spend on blah, blah, blah. So those are like behavioral. And this basically when you talk about behavioral outcomes, and what we do mostly in research, we try to connect those two things, so emotional states and personality traits, into behavioral outcomes. So what type of a personality would predict which type of an action or behavior? And survey data, and this is, I think this is pretty simple that you could read. So the format is in a questionnaire. Not always though. So this is outside the scope of this class, but also we have neurocognitive measures. And so some research could actually ask you a question and look into like how your brain react to them. So you don't have actually to respond yourself to a questionnaire, but we're not gonna cover that in this class because that's too advanced. The sources could be either self-report. So I ask you, how do you feel? Then you answer, or like there's some personality test, or it could be other observations. So like, yeah, if I give a personality test to someone and then I ask their friend or a significant other to rate their other person personality, you might get different results, right? The settings could be done online. That's the primary one nowadays. Could be in a field. So you go out like in a mall and someone stops you and you take a survey. Do they still do that, by the way? Have you ever been stopped in a mall to take a survey? Okay, so yeah, you're too young for that. I think it's not good common as it used to be. We have also like a lab, so you can be invited into a lab. They let you watch like a movie. Well, that's more like an experiment, but you could be in a lab and then answer some questions. That's like, have you taken a part in a lab study before as a participant? Miley, what study have you participated in?
I did a study for migraines.
Migraines?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was like sorry, what?
What was it about?
I just had to do like a bunch of like cognitive tests for like 6 months and then go in for like different scans, and they saw like how my brain worked doing like the cognitive tests, and it helped them somehow. But that was the only like study I participated in.
Okay. Yeah, so that was actually related to what I said earlier. So yeah, that's interesting. So that's a very like a classic lab study where you actually need devices. So you would need lab study. You would conduct lab studies if you need specific devices. So I used to do, for example, psychovisual data, which is some of like you want to do eye tracking, or you want to have like, for example, the heartbeat measures or skin conductance when people are observing specific stimuli or going through like a specific experience. You can do a survey on a telephone, as mentioned. With the design, it could be cross-sectional or longitudinal. So cross-sectional, whenever you hear that, so you would encounter that word whenever you read about research, and it just basically means one-time study. It's the word can sometimes sounds intimidating, but it simply means one time. So one section, or longitudinal, so like at different points in time, right? And the sampling could be random or non-random. And if you want to know what does that mean, you have to go back to our lecture on sampling. So this is the difference between cross-sectional. So you measure one sample at one point of time. And so cross-sectional meant if you want to reflect current reality, something. So I want to measure, yeah, as I mentioned before, what's the level of knowledge students have about the vaccination resources that the university and the state are providing. So you want to know what's happening right now. Longitudinal is if you want to see progress, and longitudinal study is basically applied or implemented when you're trying to detect change, either in reaction to some sort of an intervention or as a reaction to like an event or like a historical event. So for example, longitudinal studies are conducted a lot like during election years. So people would assess throughout like the year, what are like the voting intention of the population or like a sample of the population. But those are example of a longitudinal study. Like you want to see the progress of like how one candidate is faring against the other candidate, that's their support going up or down. Market research use longitudinal surveys a lot. So especially if you're launching a new product, and so you want to see like the level of like awareness first, and then you're tracking how people are talking about it on social media, and then how like the product reviews, and then like is it raising, it's also getting attention in like a popular media, and then what's the evaluation of that. So we would do, for instance, at different stages surveys about a specific product line or a brand. So that's like one of the most like used occasions for longitudinal research. Strengths and weaknesses for research. So we talked a lot, if you remember, about qualitative research. So survey is, to remind you, is a quantitative research. So we mentioned in qualitative research one limitation was, if you recall, that is limited in terms of like the sample. So if you remember, if you're conducting in-depth interviews, so I speak, like you speak with for 1 hour or 90 minutes with like each participant. So if it's 90 minutes and you have 10 participants, we're talking about 900 minutes, right? And if it's 20 participants, you're talking about like 1800 minutes, which is a lot, right? And only for 20 participants. A survey, you run a questionnaire, and in 2 minutes or 5 minutes, let's say, you get 200 participants and you're done. Like a short, clean, neat survey, and people just select dots from like multiple choice questions, and you're good. And so that's one strength, that it allows you to go broader. So you cover many participants more than any other comparable methods. even though and with standardized questions. So student, and it's also easier, as it's easier for you to collect data, it's easier for the participant to give data. So one short survey, you finish it in 10, 5 or 2 minutes. Quick and easy is easier for participants than to engage like in a focus group in which they have to deal with other people. They have to give thoughtful responses and interact with others and try to appear positive light. So surveys are also easier for participants. And it could, for that reason, it can give you high external generalizability, right? So if you remember, we said the larger your sample is, the more generalizable results of your study could be applied to the population, right? Especially if you're using probability sampling, right? So you could have a sample to population generalization, right? And related to that, hence surveys are more cost and time efficient. Participants in a survey, since they don't take long, even the cost of filling a survey is low, relatively speaking. So you could pay participants typically like around 50 cents, sometimes less, $1 if you're being generous, $2. And so, yeah, you can run a survey with $200 or $300 budget and in a very short period of time, and you could analyze it also, also like in a short period of time, compared to trying to analyze a large body of like transcribed text, right? As we saw, or like with interviews or content analysis, right? So those are all, if you remember, those were limitations or weaknesses, as you recall, for qualitative research, and the opposite now is true. So what was a limitation for qualitative research is actually one of the strengths of quantitative research, specifically survey in this case. As for weaknesses, so you always sacrifice one thing for the other. So we say that surveys could have like a broad like width, but it would lack depth. Okay. And what I mean by that, the difference between width and depth, is that I could, for instance, I could survey students about their knowledge about the vaccination resources, but I cannot go with each one in detail about what they know about the resources, how they feel about them, what's their intention to do them, what's their plan, blah, blah, blah. So I cannot go deep for like each individual case. That's reserved for interviews, as you recall. So I sacrifice the ability to go in depth with the ability to go in width. Okay, I will try to capture just the basic levels of knowledge for a larger sample, right? So I would run a survey with limited limited questions and multiple choice items. So it enables me to collect more people, but I cannot go with each one in detail. So I'm sacrificing the individual differences a little bit, right? The second one is that surveys are correlational and would give you correlational results, but not causal relationships. Can anyone remind us what's the difference between correlation and causation? Anyone?
It's causation does not equal correlation, is the idea that like this doesn't cause that. So like maybe like people would say, oh, I hear that religious non-secular places have higher divorce, so that that means that secular relationships are more likely unhealthy. Whereas that's not necessarily mean correlation. That's more correlation, not causation. We don't know if the non-religious or being secular causes divorces. Does that make
That's a
sense?
very good example and an interesting study, as a matter of fact. So, yeah, the difference between correlational and causation, right? Like there's like a detected association or pattern of two things, but we don't know for sure that which one caused the other. Yeah, thank you, Lisa, right? Also with Anna. So, for instance, what the example that Anna has given. So, if we see, for example, that more religious communities, right? However, we're measuring religiosity, and we're getting into that later. But if we say like more religious community have, let's say, lower divorce rates, does that mean that religiosity is causing lower divorce rates or decreasing divorce rates? Not necessarily. We don't know. There could be like a third thing we're not aware of, a third factor we're not aware of that actually caused that divorce rate. So surveys could only tell you the situation at one time, if that it just simply describing dissociation. Like, yeah, we just see that trend. It doesn't say a lot about the causation, because for causation, and we're going to cover that later, for causation, you actually need experimental research. Like you have to see, for instance, that, and this is, I'm not sure how is that possible, but if people were induced to become more religious, would they be more committed to their marital relationships? We don't know, right? But unless you have that sort of like intervention and you change one thing and then you see if the other thing would also change, you cannot claim causation. So most surveys, even if they found associations, they're just that, they're just correlations, but they don't establish causality. And we're going to talk about causality even more when we get to experiments. So yeah, it's sometimes so. Another problem with survey research is how many of you get to invitation to fill a survey when you browse websites? So surveys, about customer service or like satisfaction with the call with the AT&T guy or your shopping experience, blah blah blah. You see those invites. So Fernando, you're nodding. When was the last time you filled one of these surveys?
It was actually last night. I was on YouTube, and sometimes instead of ads, they put surveys about like ads that you would like, and so I filled one of those out.
How long did that take you?
It took me about 5 seconds because it's faster than looking at the ad. So
Okay, that's like a question, but like, when was the last time you filled like a full survey, like a full questionnaire?
um, oh well, actually, for my math class, she after every test, she has us fill out a survey to like kind of give her feedback, and that took me like 3 to 5 minutes. It was like 20 questions.
Yeah, which Fernando so brought great points. So there's a problem with surveys which is unwillingness to participate, because people are lazy and people don't like to waste their time on things they don't know the purpose of. So what surveys are getting in order to make people participate, which be to make them much shorter, that's one, or they're required. So in most cases, if the survey is not short enough, or if it's not required, most people just ignore filling it, right? As we have a live example of that. So yeah, the response, what we would call, that's like the response rate to surveys is generally low, I think, for obvious reason. And we also have many things, so like social desirability, lack of engagement, so related to the idea that people hate filling surveys. So, and I'm sure nobody did this before, but how many times you filled like an evaluation survey and you're just hitting 55555, 44444, 33333, right? I'm sure nobody did that in here before. All of you fully engage with the surveys and try to answer each question very carefully, right? Well, I don't think so, right? So that's the point. So even those responses for people who respond aren't actually like good responses. So you see that noise in the data. We call it straight lining in the biz. So we know when people do that. So surveys don't come, like survey results don't come out as clean as you think they come. It's actually, there's a lot of cleaning that you would do as a researcher just to look for, yeah, like good quality answers. And so we'll talk, yeah, okay. So we'll talk about some biases, like, and we will continue talking about bias next time, but some biases, so for example, your inability to remember facts in a survey, that's one. Instability in responses and answer, two. Something called order effects. So if one question come before the other, would that affect how you answer the second question? Misrepresentation. So because I phrased a question in one way, you thought about a different thing than what the surveyor intended. Wording effect, and also I could induce you to answer in a way by the way I worded my question. Pretending to have knowledge while you don't, so we call that full knowledge, and social desirability bias. And we're going to talk about these things in detail, actually. And so false, so yeah, memory. To tell you a secret, so people are pretty terrible when it comes to remembering things. That's actually, that's not my opinion, that's what research has shown. So people have limited time, like time period to remember. So you have a good memory of what you did. Sorry, it's, so yeah, you have good memory of what you did today, like over an hour ago, maybe a good memory of what happened yesterday. But as I go back further, what things you did last week. So what is today? It's April 9th. What did you have for lunch in March 27? Does anyone remember? Yeah, so yeah, you get, so I guess, okay, so I cannot even remember what I had for lunch yesterday. Okay, yeah, maybe that's too extreme, but you get the point. And so that's the idea, is like, that limit your ability to answer questions if the researchers are interested in knowing what facts do you remember. And so there's a problem also for, like, if you're doing eyewitness research, right? Especially like with high intensity moments or situations, people's memory get distorted, and our memories sometimes fill the holes with like imagined events, current emotional states. So you might recall something as like you feel differently than how you actually felt, because as the time progresses, you started to reflect back on a past event and you started to develop more different emotions about it. But then those emotions were then reflected back into that event, which didn't happen, right? Like, so those things, yeah, so those things would limit the validity of the answers you're going to get in research, right? So your emotional state by the time you finished, by the time you take the survey, would reflect back on the things that the surveyor is asking you about. Another one is people are unstable, as you may know. And the idea is like people change their opinions or their responses for sometimes for no clear reasons. Um, so I could, for example, ask you like how many like how much time you spend using social media, right? And that could be affected by the like maybe just this week you've been highly engaged with social media, and so you would feel that you use social media a lot, so you'll answer like you use it very frequently, right? And then in another week you just stayed away from social media, so you estimate that your average use is pretty low, but your average use could be somewhere in between, right? Like on average. So people have hard time actually telling you what they do. And right. And also people change. So sometimes you might intend to do something. So you tend to go for like a study abroad during the summer, and something happened and you change your mind. So, but if someone from the university wanted to do a survey, how excited people are about doing like a study abroad, and then yeah, but a percentage of the results I got and have dropped their interest. So the study I have in my data is not the same anymore as like what the actual population feel, or how the actual population feel. So that's another limitation. Also, it's not only people don't remember and that people change their minds, but just people are bad at knowing what they want, right? So people don't know what real effects to have on them. So, and this happens a lot, by the way, and I did that a lot in consumer research. So by a show of hands, you could do like a Zoom hands. How many of you think you would say that your purchases or your shopping behavior is affected by advertisement? Okay, 3. Yeah, that's pretty basic, right? But when then people do in-depth research, so for people who say did not answer affirmatively, they found okay, if they look back at their own purchases and they look at their media consumption behavior, they actually find a match. So your purchase decision was affected by a commercial, even if you don't recall which commercial, right? Anna, you have something to say. Okay, go ahead.
Oh no, just like raising a hand for the commercial. I forgot to take it down.
Sorry, I didn't hear that part.
No, I just meant that like my purchases are affected by advertisement.
Yeah, yeah. Let me, there's an example I always give to my students. So let me ask someone who hasn't talked in a while. So for example, when was the last time you purchased a toothpaste? Anyone?
Literally yesterday.
What did you buy?
Crest whitening.
Crest. Why do you buy Crest?
Just because that I don't know, I feel like it works better on my teeth. And I don't know, like my family has always used Crest for some reason. So I just stick with what I know. Like I don't want to explore I don't want to change or explore different types of brands.
So your choice is not affected by some sort of like an objective experimentation with different toothpaste, and then you say, okay, Crest is the best. It's just what like you used to use from your family.
Exactly. It's not like I did any research or did a compare and contrast of like different toothpaste.
and it won't, it will not feel right if you buy another toothpaste, right?
Can you say that one more time?
You didn't hear that?
No, I didn't hear what your last question was.
No,
Professor.
I asked, and sometimes it will not feel right if you would purchase another toothpaste from another brand.
Like for example, like I would be like, oh, like if that was the only toothpaste on the shelf, I wouldn't buy it if that wasn't the same brand. I would wait until like they had a different brand, or like I would go somewhere else to purchase it.
Yeah, so Ray is this is a part of another class I teach, but Ray is an example of what you call a loyal customer. But so those type of attachments that either a household makes towards a brand, or just the feeling that I need to buy from that brand or that product, is actually a reflection of exposure to multiple waves of like advertisements, promotions, word of mouth, exposures, like family or peer pressure, right? Those type of things are what shaped your attitude and what shaped your behavior. So I cannot, those things, as we've saw, can be assessed by an interview, as I've just demonstrated with Ray. But with the survey I asked, if I just ask you this like a one close-ended question, like why do you like that brand? Or like why are you afraid of like clowns? People don't know. There's a lot of behavior that people have that they don't have explanations for. And surveys, because you cannot go in depth with each individual, can hardly assess those underlying motivations. So that's one limitation, right? Okay, and sometimes, sometimes people make things up. I replaced word for things. So this was one thing. So when respondents are asked about fictitious topics, 30% would have an opinion. So one survey they did that, like, what's your opinion of like Tom Sakamoto? And 10% said they're familiar, and 50% say she saw him on TV or read about him in the news. Except that Tom Sakamoto is a fictional character. So there is that as well, right? Well, I think, so I'm just going to pause here. We covered a lot of territory. So we're going to continue about social desirability later. And I already am uploading another video about talking about the final project. So that will take like 10 minutes. Do you have any questions so far? Okay, so if not, then I hope to see you next time. Take care, bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Professor, I had a quick question for you. Sorry. So you said that we can start working on the project this weekend from your, okay, perfect. Do you know when, like, I don't want to pressure you, but do you know when I'll be able to transition into group 2?
I'll do it right now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Get otherwise.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I was gonna start working on the project because I like to stay ahead. But okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it.